Well, thank you so much, Ken, and it most certainly is my pleasure to join you again as we engage in a discussion on our international relationship, Saskatchewan and Canada's international relationship, and really the relationship that we have, the strong relationship that we have here in North America. PNWER board members, Larry Doak, the president of this year's conference, delegates, MPs that are in attendance, senators, House representatives, legislative colleagues, distinguished guests, all of those that have sponsored this event, all the ladies and gentlemen in this room, good afternoon. Welcome to our fine city of Saskatoon. Welcome to our great province of Saskatchewan. It's a tremendous honor for me to join you today as this conference gets rolling. Before I get into my remarks, there are a couple of folks that I just want to acknowledge before we start too much. And I want to begin with a colleague of mine, Premier MacLeod from the Territories, Northwest Territories, sitting in the front here. Premier MacLeod has not only been Premier for some time, he's been a strong proponent and an attendee of the PNWER conference for a number of years now and is serving as PNWER's Vice President. Canada's premiers also met in Saskatoon here just a few weeks ago in the month of July, and that actually means that Premier MacLeod, as I mentioned last night, has spent most of July in the province of Saskatchewan. So we're considering putting him up for an honorary Saskatchewan citizenship here soon. But I would never complain about that, Premier. It's been good for me to spend some time and glean some experience from our nation's longest-serving Premier in the Premier of the Northwest Territories, so I most certainly welcome you again to our fine province. I also want to thank and welcome our three former ambassadors. We have David Wilkins, David Jacobson, and Michael Kurgan. And what a way, I think, to start this conference this morning with these fine gentlemen offering their wisdom and their insights into our Canada-U.S. relations. So, Ambassador Wilkins, as many of you in this room may know, he's a frequent visitor to this province. He's been our government's representative in Washington, D.C. for quite a number of years now. Finally, I do want to recognize my colleague and my friend Larry Doak, the MLA for Cut-Knife Turtleford, the current president of PNWER. See, Larry and I have much in common. You wouldn't know that by looking at us, but we were elected in the same year, in 2011. We were actually rookies together as we entered the legislature, one slightly older than the other. But over time, I have really developed the sense of appreciation of Larry's dry wit and his inexhaustible supply of common sense. And I think over the course of this weekend, you all will appreciate that as well. But all in all, Larry's done a great job in the leading up to this conference and his leadership of PNWER, and I thank you for that, Larry. I also want to, while we're here, just provide an example of the effectiveness of this organization and the effectiveness of Larry's work specifically on behalf of Saskatchewan and Montana and how that relates to this organization. Earlier this year, as we know, or you may know or may not know, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency came forward with the proposal to reduce the operating hours at 4 border crossings between the state of Montana and Saskatchewan. The ports of Scobie, Opheim, Morgan, and Raymond were all facing reductions. Raymond, out of those ports, Raymond is the only 24-hour crossing, and it's actually the only 24-hour crossing for about a 550-mile length along that U.S.-Canada border. So this was of huge concern to us in Saskatchewan, and I think by extension much was a huge concern to the state of Montana. So Larry had immediately brought this to our government's attention, and we'd asked Larry, what options do we have here to become involved? So Larry got in touch with his friend, with John Brennan, a retired Montana state senator and a past member of this organization, of the board of directors of PNWER, actually. And I believe John is with us here today. I talked to him last night. John, are you in the... Hello, John. John started to work the phones in Washington. He worked those phones nonstop. Larry started to work his contacts in Canada. PNWER CEO Matt Morrison connected with the Customs and Border officials, and I, at Larry's request, had reached out to Governor Steve Bullock, and we engaged Montana's congressional delegation. Larry and John proceeded to attend a number of town hall meetings in Montana, along with some senior staff members from my office. And it just seemed, as we went through those meetings, that the Customs and Border officials, they just weren't listening to the folks that would be affected by this decision. So they did come around to a second round of meetings. And thanks to pressure applied by Senator Steve Daines and Representative Greg Gianforte, and I've met both of those men in Washington over the course of the last number of months, and let me tell you, they can be awfully persuasive. But thanks to their work and your work, John and Larry, there was a second set of public meetings that were ultimately arranged, and that is when John Brennan began to turn up the volume at these meetings. John began to very concisely, clearly, and emphatically communicate his displeasure with the officials at these particular meetings. The end result of this communication was that, of this joint effort really, was a climb down by the officials. The Port of Raymond remains a 24-hour port, which it was not planned to be, and the reduction in the operating hours at the other 3 crossings was scaled back considerably. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us in this room to realize, and I'm convinced of this, that the outcome would have been much different had it not been for the relationships that were formed in this room by this organization between Larry and John. And for that, I thank PNWER, and I in particularly thank the two of you for your engagement on this topic. PNWER is a place where people from both sides of the border, from both nations, can come together to discuss the common interests and the common concerns and discuss how to actually get things done in our continent. And if you have any doubt about being able to actually achieve that, go try to cross the Port of Raymond at 3 in the morning. Because due to the work of people involved with this organization, you can actually still do that. Folks, as we go through today, I want to discuss some of the issues that are pertinent to both of our nations and how we may work together with the long partnership that we have had and how we may strengthen this partnership. This partnership has contributed over the last number of decades to a strong and competitive continent. This partnership has contributed to a strong and competitive North America, make no doubt about it. A partnership that I believe is the envy of the world. And that fact, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be underscored time and time again. This partnership is the envy of the world. Sometimes we can get fixated in this room or in our conversations on day-to-day issues, and we tend to lose sight of the larger picture. But we cannot lose sight of what we have in this region, and we cannot lose sight of what we have on this continent. Because together we have built a trade relationship, a trade partnership that supports millions of families in both of our respective countries. Our trade partnership rests firmly on the foundation of our enduring friendship, and it rests firmly on our shared values. More than 80 years ago, Winston Churchill, he said this about Canada and the United States, and I quote, "The long frontier from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans, guarded only by neighborly respect and honorable obligations, is an example to every country and a pattern for the future of the world." End quote. That was true all of those years ago, and it most certainly is true today. We need to remember what we have built together as we work to address challenges that are before us, and there's no shortage of those challenges. I've been Premier now for about 1.5 years of this great province. In that time, I've made 5 trips into the United States, including a mission to Washington, D.C., where we visited and engaged with the National Governors Association. I visited with my colleagues, Premier Doug Ford of Ontario, Premier Blaine Higgs of New Brunswick. You see, in this province, in Saskatchewan, we need to be out there. We need to be out there. We have to be engaging with our customers all around the world because we are a trade-dependent jurisdiction. We are a trade-dependent province. We are export-oriented. This is what we do in Saskatchewan. And the USA is by far our most important trading partner. In fact, 84% of what we import into this province comes from the United States of America. And those include consumer items, yes, which we'd all be familiar with, but it also includes bringing products in to operate our key industries like mining, like energy, like manufacturing, and like agriculture. Industries that then in turn produce an exportable product that oftentimes will head south again to have value added to it before it's headed off to the world. In fact, about 55% of our exports, 84% of our imports, 55% of our exports head back to the United States. Just under $17 billion worth of goods in 2018. $3 billion of that $17 billion going to PNWER states directly. And they include a wide range of products, but they most certainly include agri-food products. You see, Saskatchewan is the breadbasket of our nation and often referred to, like Kansas, as the breadbasket of the world. We are home in this province to 40% of the arable farmland in our nation. We're one of the world's leading exporters of wheat, of barley, of lentils, canola, oats, peas, and mustard, among a number of other agri-food commodities. And in Saskatchewan, we have fertilizer so that we can grow all of that food. So whether you're growing corn in Kansas or canola in Canada, it's grown with potash from the world's largest producer of potash, Saskatchewan, with roughly 45% of the world's reserves. When it comes to energy, clean energy to power our industries and power our homes in North America, Saskatchewan is the second largest producer of uranium in the world. Safe, secure, sustainable Saskatchewan uranium provides clean, emissions-free electricity to about 5% of American households. We are Canada's second largest producer of oil in this province of Saskatchewan, about 500,000 barrels being produced a day. Roughly 70% of that production is shipped south to refineries in the Gulf Coast, creating jobs in that area of North America, displacing oil that is also coming into that area from countries like Venezuela. So in this province, we continue to ship a large amount of raw materials, but more and more we're adding value and we're innovating in our resource sectors, in our natural resource sectors and those industries. For example, in Saskatchewan, we are a leader in the production of farm machinery. Air drills, augers, balers, headers, mulchers, mowers, swathers, we ship all of these and many more to customers in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, and yes, into the United States. Our economy in this province continues to grow and it continues to evolve. But one thing that hasn't changed and one thing that will never change is our fortunes depend on market access. Our fortunes depend on our market relationships around the world. You see, our province, as I said, we are a free trader, and we are a free trader by necessity. So when the U.S. administration a while ago imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, and then the Canadian government in kind retaliated, that was a problem for our province. That was a large problem for our province. The cost of farm equipment increased. It increased on both sides of the 49th parallel, actually. And in our capital city in Regina, we have a steel company that specializes in making pipe for the oil and gas sector, a steel company named Evraz Steel, happens to be based out of Chicago. Well, this Chicago-based company, they also own a steel mill in Camrose, Alberta. They also own a steel mill in Portland, Oregon. They operate on both sides of the border like many companies do. Evraz also takes most of the end-of-life vehicles throughout the western provinces as well as the northwestern states. They bring them into Regina where they recycle them and melt them down into steel again. In doing so, that steel crosses the border one time. In Regina, they make a product called slab steel. That slab steel is then turned around and shipped to the Portland mill, and it's turned into a product called plate steel. It crosses the border a second time. That plate steel is then shipped either back up to Regina or to their plant in Camrose, Alberta, where it's turned into pipe, crosses the border a third time. And at the end of the day, Evraz ships more than half of its production back into the United States. It crosses the border a fourth time, paying a tariff each and every time. Those tariffs hurt Evraz. But they also hurt energy companies in Texas and Oklahoma who were depending on reliable, affordable, and sustainably produced supply of North American steel, North American pipe. And for a period of time over the course of this past year, due to the impact of tariffs by both governments, they weren't able to access that. So I say this to you today. If your concern is jobs, if your concern is jobs in Portland, Oregon, or whether it's jobs in Regina, Saskatchewan, or it's jobs in the Texas and Oklahoma oil fields, then a ratified USMCA agreement is good for you. If your concern on this continent is energy security, if your concern, and it should be, North American energy security, we need to understand that part of that security is actually getting the energy to where we need it. Often that is through a pipe. If you believe this, then a ratified USMCA is good for you. If your concern is the environment in general, or if your concern is more specific to climate change or the carbon conversation, I would say this. I would say a few things. First, without a strong North American steel industry, I don't know what we would do with the end-of-life vehicles throughout Western Canada and the northwestern U.S. states. Second, in Regina, and you must know this, Evraz uses what's called an electric arc furnace as opposed to a blast furnace. An electric arc furnace emits about 5 times fewer emissions than a blast furnace. And blast furnaces are used in most other areas of the world, in particular in one area of the world, in China. Third, on this continent, we must also understand this, that we are currently producing some of the most sustainable energy produced on Earth. And it is my firm belief that we should use more of it, as Canadians and as Americans. And we should work very hard together to make more of this sustainable energy available to the entirety of not only North America, but make it available to the rest of the world by transporting it through North American-built pipelines. If we believe this, then a ratified USMCA is not only good for us, but it's good for our industries, it's good for the communities that we represent and live in, and it's good for the families that live within our respective nations. The last time we were in Washington, we had the opportunity to discuss just this and discuss the impact that tariffs were having on industries and communities in both of our respective countries. We engaged on the importance of updating the North American Free Trade Agreement, and we in this province, as if you can't tell already, are ambitious advocates in the hope of that the USMCA can be ratified and ratified quickly by all parties. As I said, we are a trade-dependent province. The tariffs on steel and aluminum in North America have been lifted by all administrations, and we're very, very grateful for that. Last week, there was more positive direction, more positive steps taken as the President announced that he did not agree with the Department of Commerce's finding that uranium imports threaten national security. And I understand there's going to be a broader analysis of the national security considerations for the entire nuclear supply chain in the United States, and we'll see what comes out of that process. But when it comes to uranium imports, there are other places that the United States can source that product. There's Kazakhstan, for instance. There's Uzbekistan, for instance. There's Niger. And of course, you can purchase uranium from Russia. Or there's Canada. More specifically, Canadian uranium comes from Saskatchewan. So let me say this. There is value in procuring uranium from a safe, reliable partner and supplier that also happens to be a partner in NATO and also happens to be a partner in NORAD, when you look at the places around the world where you can procure this product. We in this province and in this nation have a long-standing, mutually beneficial relationship in this industry, a relationship that we truly value and that we truly feel should be extended. Friends in this room, PNWER delegates, I know we're having a conversation among the converted. When I say we need to look inward, we need to look at our protectionist instincts in both of our countries. PNWER, I know, has been advocating for the removal of tariffs, and we're very thankful for that initiative on this file. We have an enormous challenge today. We truly do, given at times what are protectionist tendencies and quite frankly, the unintended consequences that come about from actions like tariffs. But we need to meet that challenge in this room, and we need to meet that challenge across this continent. And there's some introspection is in order, even in Canada, when it comes to programs that we currently have, like supply management, for instance. It's difficult for us to ask for the unilateral elimination of tariffs when we have a quota system that is operating in certain sectors in this nation. So while we're at it, we might also consider the broader competitive context across North America from Canada's perspective. And in the United States, some consideration should be given to the Buy America program. There are efforts underway to make Buy America even more restrictive for foreign suppliers, and those foreign suppliers include suppliers from this nation of Canada and this province of Saskatchewan. That is another challenge for the competitiveness of that North American steel industry that I talked about earlier, and we'll be pushing our federal government from our perspective to gain an exemption for Canada. That exemption will ensure that the North American steel industry can remain competitive and has the ability to move product across that 49th parallel as they have by design over the course of the last number of decades. But the debate continues on the broader discussion with respect to trade. Last year, Kevin Williamson had made some astute comments about NAFTA. NAFTA is an agreement that we all in this room, I think, valued very much. I know we in this province have. And I quote Kevin Williamson with respect to his quotes that are applicable to free trade generally, not just to NAFTA. And he wrote, I quote, "In the years since NAFTA was enacted, the U.S. manufacturing has grown. Trade has grown. Exports have grown. The service industry has absolutely boomed, and the consumer price for many North American traded goods has actually gone down. Why mess with a good thing?" End quote. Or we could add that the economies of the United States and Canada are more integrated today than they have ever been, and this has occurred by design, not by accident, not by strictly geography, but has occurred by design, and there have been huge benefits for all of us due to this integration. It's that relationship that is the envy of the world. I mentioned EVRAZ and how integrated the steel industry is across our border. We could talk about oil that's flowing back and forth between the two countries. We could talk about electricity with 35 electrical transmission interconnects between our two countries along the border. Or we could talk about agriculture. There are many examples in agriculture. If you farm in North America, regardless of which side of the border you farm on, you may start your operations in the spring with a disc, a Wishick disc that was actually built in South Dakota. When you head out to seed, you'll likely use an air drill that is manufactured right in Saskatchewan. You'll pull that air drill using a tractor that was built either in North Dakota or Iowa. You'll protect your crops with chemicals that were made in Michigan, New Jersey, or Missouri. And you'll apply these crop protection products with a GPS-controlled 120-foot applicator that likely is built in Benson, Minnesota. You'll use potash that is mined in Saskatchewan by Nutrien or K+S or an American company called Mosaic. That same company may supply you with your phosphate fertilizer coming out of Florida. When you harvest your crop, you might use a big green combine that comes from Illinois or possibly a red one from Nebraska, and I won't get into that debate. But regardless of the color of your harvester, you're going to dump your grain into a trailer that may have been built in Indiana, pulled by a truck that was built in Ohio or Pennsylvania. If the crop that you produced is a pulse crop, it should be noted that the genetics in the formation of that crop were developed by the Crop Development Center at the University of Saskatchewan, just down the road from where we are here today, my alma mater. Those harvested pulses, though, may be shipped to North Dakota, where they'd be processed by a Saskatchewan company with operations in Minot, North Dakota, in AGT Foods and Ingredients. If it's Saskatchewan oats that you grew, it'll be shipped down to Iowa, and it'll be rolled into oats by Quaker. If you planted canola, it may go to Clavette, Saskatchewan, again a community just a few miles outside of Saskatoon, and at Clavette, there is an American company, a small American company named Cargill, Cargill operates the largest canola crush plant in the world at Clavette, Saskatchewan. And it's worth noting during this entire process, you are going to use the world's most sustainable energy, North American energy. You'll use farm equipment that is made and manufactured with North American steel. And you will be part of a production system producing the highest quality, the most affordable, and the most sustainably produced food in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the level of economic immigration that we have achieved on this continent. And in both countries, I say we are better off because of that integration. We are most certainly stronger when we are together. Folks, the states and provinces that make up PNWER are in an enviable position. Among us, we have the natural resources. We have the technical and the educational institutes. We have the researchers. We have the ambition and we have the entrepreneurial drive. But there is so much more that we can do. There is absolutely no limit to the success that we can realize. If we just put aside our parochial interests and focus on ways to make our region and our continent even stronger, to focus on ways to make us all stronger. And it seems to me that's exactly what you're doing at this conference here this week. So I ask you to realize the full impact of your discussions this week. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just conclude with this. In 1947, President Harry Truman, he came to Canada on a state visit. He traveled on the presidential train. He was accompanied by his wife Bess and his daughter Margaret. There was a wreath ceremony at the War Memorial in Ottawa. Memories of the Second World War, they must have been very fresh and very vivid at that point. The tremendous sacrifice and the loss of Canadians and Americans fighting together in the defense of our liberty. President Truman, he said this in his speech to Parliament, and I quote, "The record proves that in peaceful commerce, the combined efforts of our countries can produce outstanding results. We seek a peaceful world, a prosperous world, a free world, a world of good neighbors living on terms of equality and mutual respect, as Canada and the United States have lived for generations." End quote. Delegates here today, delegates of PNWER, those lofty sentiments, they still challenge us today. Let's let those sentiments inspire our work here this week. Let us not take good fortune for granted, and let us to continue to serve as a shining example to the world, not only for today, but for generations to come. Thank you very much. Enjoy your deliberation.